So let's start this session. It is my pleasure to start the first session, sunset session, let's say, that we expect that be a cool session where people can connect and interact with each other. Before starting, or on starting, I would like to stress out 2 or 3 things. The first thing is that this session aims also to present the work we are doing in this master. This is the first year we have people finishing the master, what is a good achievement for the master, so that we want to celebrate somehow. We believe that the master, that students with this master can have a successful career, most successful career as possible. And we strongly believe that this is true. And we, of course, this kind of master expects to have and is obviously completely open to the society and to the companies. And one thing that I think we should achieve is that what we do in complement with companies is also the best in terms of state-of-the-art on data science, in a way that this can leverage the value of the companies, but also the value of the universities, because we acquire knowledge with that. Ethics and responsibility is something that is something that is needed in everything, but in artificial intelligence we don't know a lot about it because it poses new problems that typically we still are thinking on how this is. This session is about this, and I hope we can learn a bit on this. I hope so. So the first presentation will be by Ana Costa Silva, and Pedro Aguiar will present.
So, hello everybody. So let me introduce Ana Costa Silva. She's the Global Chief of Data Science at Mercer, right? And I believe she did a PhD in Edinburgh, University of Edinburgh, in 2000 something. And she's gonna talk about something. Interesting, of course. Okay, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Ana, and I'm from Porto. Always a good way to start a conversation. I studied my undergraduate degree at FEP in management, which is a bit unusual for a data scientist. In fact, these days, data scientists are people from IT or from a statistical background. I'm neither of those, sorry. But having studied management originally, and there was lots of econometrics and regression analysis and statistics and maths. And eventually I realized I could do a little bit of math. So I joined the Portuguese Central Bank Statistics Department. And there I realized that if you could either code, or one day eventually you'd be doing photocopies. And so I started doing my scripting in SAS, and then MATSAT came along, the master's in MATSAT. No, it wasn't MAT, it wasn't SAT, it was the master's in data analysis and decision support systems. And eventually I realized I need to learn some more and went to do a PhD in AI in Edinburgh. So yes, been doing working with data science since, gosh, when did I finish my PhD again? So with data since 1999, which makes me a lot older than I look. Thank you. This is a talk about ethics, and what is ethics, and why do we need to talk about ethics in an AI world? To tell you the truth, the first time I heard about people being so concerned about ethics in AI, I was like, oh, come on, these people so overcomplicate. Then they gave me a few examples, and I went like, oops, this matters. So a definition in Portuguese and in English of what is ethics, from the word ethos, for character of Greek, and it's the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or their conduct of an activity. Moral principles, things we adhere to be part of a greater good. And what does that mean for us? You might notice the first photo on the top left, Obama, got recognized by AI system as a white dude with blue eyes. The reason for this is that a lot of the data that AI systems are learned from in some of the countries where AI systems are developed is biased towards white people. So this underrepresentation of different races makes for sometimes some rather cruel decisions. The image on the bottom right is by IBM, and it was a model that IBM redrew because it was learned from police cameras all over town, and it was biased to find African Americans. And the worst, perhaps, is the one on the left. You might see the image at the bottom was recognized by Google AI photos. Google AI decided to redraw the AI algorithm that finds gorillas in photographs, and that was what they considered to be ethical. This underrepresentation of certain types of data permeates our AI in a lot of other ways. And notice that ethics in AI is something everybody's talking about and writing about. The EU, the US, several organizations, Google, IBM, Facebook, are getting together to define what it means to be ethical in an AI world and avoid some biases that were meant to be but are there in the data or are there in the way humans have behaving so far that as we move our decision-making to machines, we need to be conscious about avoiding. And as communities out there, which are still not legally binding, but are writing about what ethics in AI means, they have identified some of the riskiest use cases by order of priority. So the first one is the systems for biometric identification are considered some of the riskiest areas. You can imagine that if when we pass our passport gate these days, we're so proud that we can be identified and recognized as us by a machine. I don't know, I got thrilled with that. The amount of time we save on the line is amazing. However, if these systems are biased towards certain types of faces, then some people are going to be cornered by the police. Sometimes the system fails, and you get to be escorted and talk to a different person. So, that's important. Also in the field of HR, and I work in the field of HR these days, having worked in diverse data fields over time, if you have systems that are intended at recruiting people or choosing who should be promoted or terminated, etc., that are AI-based, then it is critically important that the systems are ensuring fair representation and what ethics might mean. And the last case is in gray because I added that. I don't remember if it was in the legislation, but it's one of the ones that gets me angrier, is that, I just got one of the papers that talks about this, is the underrepresentation of Asians and Africans in medical research studies published in the US. So you can imagine someone creates a drug for a certain disease and forgets to measure its ability to do good in representative enough samples of the world's population. And then they go and trial it out in poorer countries sometimes, and oops, it's too late now. And these things, unfortunately, do happen. So then the question is, but this is only for advanced AI systems, right? Those AI systems that are based on images and deep learning, and no, it's not. In fact, the regulations, European, etc., not really regulations. There are regulations in the making. They may become regulatory and compulsory in 2-3 years' time, and then we'd better be ready, right? Not just because we want to comply, but mostly because we want to do good and not do bad unwillingly. So anyway, what are the types of AI systems that are concerned? Machine learning, yes, but also knowledge-based systems, which are as simple as if-then-else rules that are applied by a computer. Statistical approaches, Bayesian estimation, search, and optimization methods. So quite vague, quite a large branch. And so how do we ensure this ethics in AI, right? So what are these people coming together, these associations coming together, what are they defining as the core principles of what it means to be ethical in AI? Well, the first one is transparency. We need to be able to explain in non-technical terms what on earth our models are doing. This can be annoying, right? Explaining a deep learning model, isn't easy by design. However, when people are going to use the models in the real world to make decisions, they need to understand what it does, and especially what it doesn't do. And they need to have it well present when they're going to apply those models in real life in order to be able to be fair. And this explainability needs to be at the whole system level, but also at the specific outcome. How is it? What is the confidence level that we have for the prediction of a particular person or unit of our data, etc. Now, what you see on the right is a video. You have the YouTube. And what you're actually seeing is a Tesla car bumping against an airplane. Some car owner decided to use the autopilot, a bit like you remember the car with that ding, 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 when we were in the 90s. I'm that old. Maybe that was the 80s. Anyway, this guy beeped for the car to come and get it, and the car just bumped into an airplane and continued pushing forwards because there were no airplanes in its training data ever. It did not realize an airplane was an obstacle. And this is a funny one because nobody was in the car, but there's this guy making YouTube videos for a long time saying how cool his Tesla was and how well he was driving. And so he would just sometimes fall asleep in the car and poofed because the model wasn't trained to identify a truck crossed over the road because it never happens in the training data, right? So this risk of overtrust is something that can be aided by implementing transparency in our models. The funny thing, however, is that if you look and read the documentation of Tesla, there are bold letters saying, do not overtrust the system. But then again, people just get so excited, sometimes act a little irrationally. So at what point is it the company's fault and what point is it the driver's fault? But how do we ensure, and maybe if you're going to buy a Tesla, maybe you get a little training and not just be expected to read page number 155 of the manual of the users. This is another good example, and it talks a little bit about that underrepresentation that I've been mentioning from the start. I know I'm biased towards underrepresentation because I feel about it, but there are several pillars of ethics in AI. Anyway, this is a true story, and it's not even that AI-driven. Initially, when seatbelts were created, drivers was mostly men, and so it has been found that women are more likely to get injured when sitting in the front of car crashes, if pregnant women also, because the seatbelt is thought for a male morphology and not for a female morphology. So there you are. The bias in data and automatic systems, or even manual systems, has been there for a long time. I mean, we as humans are biased every day, right? So yes, ensuring or trying as hard as we bloody can to ensure that the data we use adequately represents the world, so it does not discriminate against groups of people, is critical. So we need to ensure our data is diverse, inclusive, and equitable, and conduct anti-bias tests. And then what if you have all the data that you can possibly have, and that data is biased? That's a question I leave with you. I don't have a good answer for that. The other four pillars are do no harm, so intentionally avoid doing harm to others, for example. And often a time when we create a model, we think, I did this great model, it has these amazing KPIs, accuracy, area under the curve, blah, 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 blah. In theory, it's awesome, I'm done, right? But these days, the definition of done needs to include the operationalization of that model. How is that model, when it's being used in the real world, how you're going to ensure that it keeps on being good enough? And when it's not good enough anymore, then it's going to be withdrawn and replaced with something good enough. That's called model monitoring. And it's critical that our machine learning and AI work goes as far as to how we deploy it in the real world and how we keep monitoring its goodness. Responsibility. AI is AI, but humans make AI, so we are responsible for the models we make. And we need to be, humans need to be in the loop, say the regulations, at least to an extent. So, for example, having, as we are, this is called model ops, as we take, and model governance, as we take our models to production, they need to go through, we need to, as we have those model monitoring metrics, we need to be able to include ways that a human might pull the plug if needed, and act. We also need to have peer review. For example, in my team these days, we have implemented a process for doing a machine learning, right? From business understanding to data preparation to these things that everybody knows, model monitoring, model governance, and peer review. We actually review the major steps with each other of where we got to in our current understanding of the phase. And that gives us a space to communicate, to dialogue, to learn from each other, and to not keep it all in our heads, and to be questioned and challenged at each step of what we're making. Because great minds think alike, and two minds think better than one, etc., etc. Privacy. Lots of companies have been charged, fined for a few millions because of privacy. We've been hearing in the news. We need to ensure that we use the identified data, that we store as little PI data as we possibly can, personal information data, just enough for what we do, and that we have permissions to use the data. Because if someone gave you data for a purpose and you're using it for someone else, that's a bit mischievous. I know we as data scientists just love data, right? But yeah, it matters. And finally, safety. For example, in many organizations, we go to our Python and our R libraries and install it on our laptop and we run with it. But sometimes, in R it's a bit more difficult, but in Python, depending on the type of organization you're in, it's useful to have a way of ensuring the security of the code, of open source code, at least when done and reused, not just use blindly whatever is in the net, but have a little, and there are many automatic ways to check for code and the white scan, whatever. Right. Anyway, talking about this a bit from a corporate perspective as well. But now let's imagine a little bit, why also do these ethics matter? We've been seeing so many restrictions in how we can use data, people data, health data. We cannot put that out there because people might exploit it, people might bias election results with it. But if we manage to get to a space where we are trusted to use data ethically, maybe over time, we get to have access to more data. What is a world where we have access to health data? And it's not just doctors analyzing health data for their specific hospitals. We can actually navigate the world of health data globally. This is my dream, okay, bear with me. And then we can run our models on top of everybody's data, including African, including Asian data, so as to avoid this underrepresentation of our samples. So we can do so much good just by throwing a computer onto a bunch of data and detecting correlations that might not be obvious for a theoretical thinker, but might lead to questions like, why is the angle of your feet correlated with the headaches that you have in a large amount of number of people? And maybe that brings new questions that open new doorways and new gateways to bring human knowledge to the next level. So that's my dream. So there, thank you. Any questions? 4, 5, 6. I had to count them as well. It's like, I only have 5, there's one missing.
So the other question is, for me, there's some confusion here about... Oh, sorry. Sorry, so there's obviously some confusion in my head because this is not my area of expertise. On two things. I think most people are blaming AI, but in reality, the problem is that you don't have enough data, or you don't have representable data from all the corners. So how do you fix that? The other problem seems to me that what if a group of people does not want to volunteer their data, but later on want to demand that the system be also include them in their responses? So how do you fix that problem? I mean, going back to one of your examples about flying and whatnot, I mean, some people in the Samoan Islands are notoriously big, okay? So then they might purchase an airline ticket, and then when they get to the gate, they cannot fit through the gate or cannot fit in the seat. And so then they start complaining. And then obviously the airline cannot profile them, cannot get enough data in advance because that would be discriminatory or profiling and whatnot, right? So then they demand that the airlines make accommodations. I mean, I think that's unreasonable. So how do we fix this problem of a group of people who willingly does not want to volunteer that data, but later on want to demand that, you know, the companies accommodate their, you know, settings, so to speak. So that's just a couple of thoughts.
Great question. Personally, like I said, I would love to be able to have everybody's data, but I think what the regulations are, the future regulations are pointing towards is transparency. Look, this model works on this type of people. It does not work on that type of people. That's it. And then it needs to be loud and clear as well. Not just it's written in page 155.
Yeah, but you might not even know that there are other types of people. How many other types of people
are,
right? So at a given point, you mean your legislation needs to be so wide open that basically it's useless to some extent by saying that, oh, this only works on this, but there might be other people out there in which it doesn't work. We actually don't know and don't know how to distinguish them. So that's a little bit of a concern, right?
Yeah, but that is part of the responsibility, right? We don't know. We know that it works on this data. What is the type? Then we profile the type of data that we have tested again, the type of people we've tested again, the type of conditions. So for example, in the driving car, this model has been learned against, and not only in row 155, if there's that much risk of a person dying for not using the cow well, maybe they should be doing a training course, right? That actually gets them to that level of understanding. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own actions. But come on, medical health studies in whatever is called the developed world are obviously leaving out huge amounts of the population of the world, and they're not telling us that. Or maybe it's not loud and clear. Can they make a conscious effort to increase the representation of the samples in other countries? I think they can. Okay, I'm off the hook. Thank you.
Well, actually, I have one.
Oh no.
So, how easy is it for you to sell this to the upper management, right? So you tell them this nice story, and then they say, so, you know, how much is it in it for us? How much will we lose for taking this into account? Do you get this kind of discussion?
Not really, but I think I'm in a very conscientious, socially responsible organization. We actually part of the teams that go and discuss what ethics in AI means. Right? So, but I think the question is out there at a point. I mean, this will be compulsory in 2 years' time. I think 2-3 years' time, these things will be part of law. So maybe they can play catch afterwards, right?
This is inevitable, okay? And like GDPR, many other legislation will come because of this. So companies must understand they need to work and spend money on this, okay?
Yeah. The winter is coming. Or in this case, summer.
So thanks. João Pedro Pego. I'm a civil engineer by formation, and one of the things that distinguishes us, at least in Portugal, is that we have to sign the projects and everything. So we assume individual responsibility. Do you think if data scientists and data engineers would be individually responsible for the models, things would be working better or not?
Good question. Maybe I wonder how fair it would be, right? If you're an employee, you're taking personal risk for decisions that maybe are not in our budget or in our power to affect because they come from upper management. And also upper management who enjoys, well, it's also the whole companies typically who enjoy the labor of our intellect, right? Financially, so they should be financially responsible for the blame as well, but that's, of course, just a personal opinion. Someone else up there, Carlos.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. And maybe just to mention that this very question is something that is being discussed in the context of the current negotiations of legislation at European level, specifically the distribution of responsibilities and in terms of liability throughout the supply chain, which is also related to how you define the different actors in this context. But perhaps that is something that I can address a little bit more in detail later on during my own presentation.
Wonderful. So, that's the nice thing of today's flow, is that some of the answers will come later. Stay tuned. Okay, I think we're... No, one more? Thank you very much.